A series of explosions occurred in Taganrog, Russia. A major fire broke out at an electrical substation. According to Russian public sources, part of the city was left without electricity and water. Meanwhile, Andriy Kovalenko, head of the Center for Countering Disinformation at Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council, hinted that interesting events are also taking place at another energy facility in Russia. However, he did not provide any details. Agents of Atesh carried out a successful sabotage operation on the railway near Simferopol. Partisans struck a key logistical artery of Russian troops in the Kherson and Zaporizhzhia directions. As a result of the operation, train traffic was halted, directly disrupting the supply of ammunition, fuel, and equipment to the Russian Federation's army.
The Atesh movement continues to systematically destroy the transport infrastructure of the Russian occupiers. Even deep in the rear in Crimea, they cannot feel safe. From a statement by the Atesh partisan movement on Telegram.
Ukraine's defense forces have halted the advance of Russian troops in the eastern part of Zaporizhzhia region and have cleared several settlements there. This was reported by the commander of the Ukrainian Air Assault Forces, Valentin Manko. He added that the Russian army is building up its forces in this direction and preparing for new attacks in the Zaporizhzhia region. But Ukraine's defense forces continue to thwart the occupiers' plans. Right now, we are fighting in the settlements of Poltavka and Uspenivka, and our units are already present in Uspenivka. From these two settlements, the enemy tried to advance toward Huliaipol. Thanks to the coordinated actions of the assault units, they were stopped. Since yesterday, and also last night, we have been working very actively and productively. The enemy tried to infiltrate toward Sladkoy and Ravnopoli. We have already cleared these settlements and moved further ahead. And we are still working on Uspenovka and Poltavka. In other words, the direction the enemy chose for a new attack, for a new offensive, we have stopped. The armed forces of Ukraine continue to thwart the Kremlin's plans to capture Pokrovsk, holding the defense and repelling assaults by Russian occupiers. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, 141 combat engagements have already been recorded on the front since the beginning of the day. More details about the situation on the front line are coming up in the report. The Pokrovsk direction remains the hottest spot. Since the start of the day, Ukrainian soldiers have repelled nearly half of all recorded Russian attacks on this section of the front. The soldiers showed a bird's-eye view of Mirnorad. It is clear that the Russians have practically destroyed the city. The military notes that Russian occupiers in the Pokrovsk direction and around Mirnorad continue to use infiltration tactics with small groups. But all such attempts are thwarted by the defense forces, thereby disproving Russian propaganda fakes about allegedly capturing Ukrainian cities.
Mirnorad is not completely cut off and is holding its positions and is not under enemy control, despite Putin repeatedly claiming that Pokrovsk and Mirnorad are already surrounded and effectively captured. In other words, what the Russian General Staff reports at the level of fakes doesn't hold up. On the contrary, we have strengthened our positions.
In addition, more than 50 Russian attacks were repelled in total on the Huliaipol, Lyman, and Kostiantynivka sections of the front. According to Ukrainian soldiers, the situation remains difficult at the Oleksandrivka bridgehead as well. Here, fighting is taking place on the border of the Dnipropetrovsk and Donetsk regions.
Putin has set a strategic objective to capture the Pokrovsk agglomeration. He has not managed to advance on all sectors. He assumed that the movement would be in the Sumy region, Kharkiv, at the 3 points we mentioned, such as Vovchansk, for example, Kupiansk, and then further on to Luhansk and Lyman, and to launch offensive operations from different directions. Of course, he believed the breakthrough would be in the Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhzhia regions, but there were not enough forces and resources.
Ukrainian soldiers showed the destruction of an infantry fighting vehicle that the Russians tried to hide in a grove between the trees. The fighters note that the enemy did not succeed in this.
The vehicle drove in. It needs to be burned. We stopped it, hit it, put 7 FPV drones into it, but it wouldn't catch fire. But it needs to be burned. I couldn't take it anymore, so I told the green one, let me run over and burn it myself. When you manage to burn a vehicle on the first try, it's just awesome.
Ukrainian soldiers discovered a downed Russian reconnaissance drone in one of the directions. And when they checked the footage from its surveillance camera, it turned out that the UAV had been neutralized by an ordinary owl. The soldiers also reported that in just one day, more than 10 Russian Molniya drones were destroyed in the Lyman direction alone. In total, along the entire front line yesterday, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, 440 Russian operational tactical level UAVs and 8 cruise missiles were shot down. Additionally, the fighters destroyed 5 Russian tanks, 1 armored vehicle, 19 artillery systems, 85 units of automotive equipment, and eliminated another 970 Russian occupiers. Thus, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the total combat losses of the Russian army since the beginning of the full-scale invasion have already exceeded 1,151,000 soldiers. Ukraine remains the main priority for the Council of Europe. This was stated by the Secretary-General of the organization, Alain Berset. He said that the Council has already launched a registry of damages caused to Ukraine by the Russian Federation, is also preparing to establish an international claims commission, and continues to work on a special tribunal for crimes of aggression committed by Russia. Berset emphasized that despite the ongoing fighting, the work to rebuild Ukraine has already begun.
Their values are our values. Their hopes are our hopes. And their future is our future. Ukraine remains our top priority. The Council of Europe stands with you in the most difficult times when it matters most. Alain Berset, Secretary-General of the Council of Europe.
The European Union has begun preparing its 20th package of sanctions against Russia. It is known that the new restrictions are planned not only against Moscow but also against Minsk. As stated by the Minister of Finance of Lithuania, the Lukashenko regime is helping the Kremlin circumvent European sanctions and is also involved in provocations on EU territory. Therefore, the new sanctions package will include additional restrictions for Belarus. Andriy Dmitrenko will provide more details. In the
EU, the 20th package of sanctions is being prepared. Its main targets will be the financial and energy sectors of the aggressor country. This was announced by the Minister of Finance of Lithuania, Kristupas Vaitis-Kūnas, and the European Commissioner for Financial Services, Maria Luisa Albuquerque, at a press conference in Vilnius. The EU will work with third countries to prevent the circumvention of restrictions, stated the European Union representative.
At the end of October, another package of sanctions was agreed at the EU level, the 19th already, but it is necessary to further intensify the pressure. That is why we must already begin a serious discussion of the next sanctions package. We are monitoring the situation, and many of those who advocate circumventing sanctions will be included in our future packages. As part of the 20th package, Belarus will also be subject to restrictions.
Russia must be plunged into long-term international isolation, and its shadow fleet must disappear from the waters of the European Union, said Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson. According to Estonian intelligence, about 60% of the aggressor country's illegal vessels pass through the Baltic Sea. Pressure on the Kremlin is not only about helping Ukraine, but also about ensuring the security of EU countries, noted the head of the Estonian government.
Long-term changes happen under pressure. Sanctions are working, so we must quickly move forward with implementing the 20th package of sanctions. Let us continue to target the export of Russian fossil fuels and the shadow fleet. This threatens both our security and the environment. Together with our neighbors, we are truly doing everything we can to disrupt the activities of the shadow fleet. And I believe that it is vulnerable. Russia still has 2 effective ways to use the revenues obtained in this way, but we are constantly monitoring them. And I am firmly convinced that Sweden, Estonia, and the other EU countries must prepare for the long-term isolation of Russia. This will not end with the conclusion of this war.
On October 23rd, the EU introduced its 19th package of restrictions against Russia. It expanded the list of sanctioned shadow fleet vessels to 557. The import of liquefied gas from the aggressor country and cooperation with the Federation's energy companies have been banned. Restrictions have also been introduced in the trade and banking sectors. A number of Chinese companies that helped the aggressor country circumvent restrictions have also come under sanctions. Kyiv is working on synchronizing sanctions with Brussels.
We are also working on extending European Union sanctions to the jurisdictions of other European countries that are not EU members. This is a powerful package of measures aimed in particular at the export of Russian resources and schemes for supplying electronic components to Russia. And the overall impact of the 19th package of measures on reducing Russia's revenue is estimated at no less than tens of billions of euros per year. Volodymyr Zelensky, president of Ukraine, on the social network X.
Amid the West's efforts to increase pressure on Moscow, the European Commission has proposed a plan that would allow the use of frozen Russian state assets. On November 7th, a meeting was held between representatives of the European Commission and Belgium, where the fate of the assets was discussed. But a final decision is still a long way off.
The EU is pushing forward a plan to use 140 billion euros of frozen Russian assets held in the Belgian financial depository Euroclear. However, the Belgian government states that the risks associated with this unprecedented operation are significant and require legal guarantees that it will not be held liable for any unintended consequences. It is also concerned about possible retaliatory measures from Russia, from a publication by Euronews.
The European Commission is looking for ways to maintain stable financial assistance to Ukraine until 2026. In October, EU leaders agreed to revisit this issue and make a final decision in December after considering alternative options. Experts note that the issue of frozen assets has shifted from a legal to a political domain.
Belgium says that first and foremost, one of the main issues that needs to be resolved is what to do about Hungary, because the European Union reviews its sanctions every 6 months, essentially extending them. And if Hungary vetoes the sanctions, then of course these assets would be immediately unfrozen.
Washington supports steps to confiscate Russian assets in Europe, Reuters reports, citing sources in the White House. A total of $300 billion of the aggressor country's assets have been frozen outside the Federation. 210 billion of those are in the territory of the European Union. And
To other important news of the day. China has lifted restrictions on the export of strategic materials to the US until November of next year. This concerns dual-use goods such as gallium, germanium, and antimony. They are used in military technologies for missile and munition surveillance systems, as well as in the production of semiconductors for smartphones and computers. I should note that the goods on which Beijing lifted the embargo are purchased by 36 American companies, mainly from the defense sector as well as the aerospace industry. US President Donald Trump has appointed a special representative to Belarus. The position was given to attorney John Cole. The American leader announced this on his social network, Truth Social. I should note that in September of this year, thanks to the efforts of Trump's team, 52 people who had been arrested for their political views were released from Belarusian prisons. According to human rights organizations, more than 1,000 people who disagree with Lukashenko's policies may be under arrest. The White House has denied the statement by Hungarian Foreign Minister Péter Szijjártó that Washington has allegedly lifted sanctions from Budapest indefinitely for purchasing Russian energy resources. A representative of the US presidential administration confirmed in an email to Reuters that the exemption will only be in effect for 1 year. Let me remind you, the decision to lift the restrictions was made after a personal meeting between Trump and Orbán at the White House. At that meeting, the Hungarian Prime Minister literally begged for the sanctions to be lifted for importing Russian energy resources. However, it's not that simple. It's not just for nothing. In exchange, Budapest agreed to purchase $600 million worth of American liquefied natural gas.